The stars had always been a source of mystery and wonder to the people of Earth. Yet for the first time in history, they were about to become a symbol of fear. A strange ship, unlike any seen before, entered the atmosphere. The sky turned dark, and a cold wind swept across the land. Panic spread across the world as the massive alien craft slowly descended toward the surface. No one knew what to expect, but the fear was undeniable. From the ship, a group of aliens emerged. They were tall and imposing, their skin a strange shade of blue, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly intensity. They moved with precision, their steps heavy as they made their way through the streets. The humans who dared to look upon them were frozen, unable to move, unable to think. What had they come for? Why were they here? Among the invaders, one figure stood out. She was different from the others. She was smaller, her features delicate. Her skin a shimmering purple. Her eyes, although dark and mysterious, held a deep sadness. She had been taken from her home, a distant planet far beyond the reach of Earth. For her, the journey had been one of despair. She had been sold into slavery, her life no longer her own. She didn't know what awaited her on this new world, but she feared it would be worse than anything she had ever experienced. As she was led through the streets, she glanced at the humans around her. They were just as frightened as she was. They were confused, uncertain of what would happen next. But the aliens were not here to conquer them in the way many feared. No, they were here for something else entirely. The girl whom the humans had begun to call Lyra was to be a symbol of their power, a trophy, a creature to be displayed for all to see. She was brought to a small, isolated building on the outskirts of the city. Inside, the air was thick with tension, and the walls seemed to close in around her. In the center of the room stood a middle-aged human man. His name was John, and he had been chosen to receive Lyra. He didn't look like the kind of man who would have anything to do with alien slavery. In fact, he seemed out of place in this dark, grim world. Lyra's heart pounded in her chest. She had heard whispers of what humans could do to slaves like her. She had been prepared for the worst. But as she looked into John's eyes, she saw something unexpected. There was no malice there, no cruelty. There was only confusion and a strange sadness. He looked at her as if she were not a slave, but a person with a story. She was confused. Why had he taken her? What did he want from her? Was he really going to treat her the way the others had warned her about? As John moved closer to her, Lyra instinctively recoiled, pulling at the ropes that bound her wrists. But he did not strike her, nor did he raise his hand in anger. Instead, he slowly untied the ropes, his hands gentle, as though he were careful not to hurt her. "You're free," he whispered softly, almost as if to himself. "I will not hurt you." Lyra didn't know what to think. She had been brought to this planet with one expectation: to suffer. But now, this man, this human, was offering her something entirely different. What did it mean? Was it real? Could it be? Lyra had been taken from her home, a place of green skies and endless fields, where peace was the only language spoken. The journey to Earth had been long, filled with terror and uncertainty. She had expected cruelty, punishment, and suffering. For that was the life of a slave, especially one from a distant alien world. But what she found here, in the small, isolated building with John, was not what she had imagined. John didn't hurt her. He didn't yell at her, nor did he demand anything from her. Instead, he offered her food, water, and a space to rest. Her instincts told her to distrust him, to be wary, to expect betrayal. But the more she observed him, the more confused she became. He wasn't like the others. He didn't look at her with the cold, calculating eyes of an owner. He didn't see her as a possession, a thing to be controlled. John would check on her every day, bringing her something small, a piece of fruit, a blanket when she was cold. A simple conversation when the silence between them grew too heavy. Lyra remained silent for most of these encounters, her heart still filled with fear and suspicion. She had been a slave for so long that kindness was a foreign concept to her. She had been taught to believe that all humans would treat her the same way the invaders had, without mercy, without compassion. And yet, here was John, a man who did the opposite. She began to notice the details. His hands were rough, calloused from years of hard work. His clothes were simple, stained from the dirt of the land. His eyes, though tired, held a kindness that she had never seen before. He didn't treat her like a slave. He treated her like a person. But despite this, Lyra's fear didn't fade. It lingered, a constant companion that reminded her of the world she had come from. She couldn't forget what she was: a slave, someone who had been bought and sold. No amount of kindness could erase that. One day, as John sat beside her, watching the sun begin to set outside, Lyra finally spoke. "Why?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Why are you helping me?" John turned to look at her, his expression soft but filled with an emotion she couldn't place. "I don't know," he said quietly. "Maybe I'm just trying to make things right. I've seen enough suffering in my life to last 1,000 lifetimes. I can't fix it all, but I can start here with you." Lyra didn't know how to respond. She had been raised to believe that kindness had a price, that no one did something for nothing. But John's words seemed to hang in the air, unanswered, as if they held a truth that she wasn't ready to understand. As days turned into weeks, the small acts of kindness continued. Lyra started to trust him, just a little. It was a slow process, one that required her to confront the lies she had been told all her life. And yet, despite the small steps forward, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. The universe was vast, and nothing ever stayed still for long. She knew her time on Earth would not last forever. The invaders would come for her eventually. And when they did, would John still be there? Or would he turn his back on her, just like the rest? The days had passed slowly, each one a mixture of uncertainty and hope for Lyra. She had been on Earth long enough now to see the difference in John, and perhaps even in herself. The days were no longer spent in fear, but in contemplation. She began to feel something strange growing inside her, a feeling she had never known. It was warmth, a flicker of safety, a spark of something that felt like peace. But doubt lingered in the corners of her mind, like a shadow that refused to fade. Lyra had been taught that survival meant never trusting anyone, especially a human. She had heard stories of other slaves who had dared to trust, only to be betrayed. She knew what happened to those who let their guard down. And yet, John was so different. His actions, his words, they didn't match the cruelty she had been told to expect. Every time she looked into his eyes, she saw kindness, but also something else, a sadness that mirrored her own. Was he just pretending? Was it all an act, a trap? One evening, as the stars began to twinkle in the sky, Lyra found herself sitting near John, the fire crackling between them. The air was cool, the world outside still and quiet. She couldn't keep the questions inside her any longer. "Why did you buy me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do you want from me?" John didn't look at her right away. He stared into the fire, the flames dancing in his eyes as if searching for an answer. For a moment, the silence between them was thick with the weight of his unspoken thoughts. "I didn't buy you," he said quietly. "I didn't want to buy anyone. I didn't want any of this. But I was forced to. You were forced into this too, and I couldn't stand to see it happen." Lyra looked at him, confused. Forced? John's eyes flickered to hers, and for the first time, Lyra saw something real in his gaze, a vulnerability. "I'm not here to hurt you, Lyra. I'm not like them." He motioned to the distant sky, to the ships that still lingered above, their presence ever watchful. "I was brought here by the same people who took you. But I don't believe in their ways. I don't believe in slavery. I don't believe in forcing others to suffer for no reason. That's not who I am." The fire crackled again, and Lyra sat in stunned silence. She had always believed that humans were cruel, that they were just like the invaders who had taken her from her home. But John ... he was different. He was human, yet his words spoke of something deeper, something she had never expected. "And the pleasure?" she asked hesitantly. "What about that? Why did you ... why do you treat me so kindly?" John's face softened, and his eyes seemed to darken for a moment. "I know what you think. You think I'm using you, that I have some sort of hidden agenda. But I don't. I know that what I'm offering, it's not easy for you to understand. You've lived a life of pain and suffering, and now you're here, and everything feels like a lie. But the truth is, Lyra, I don't want to hurt you. I never did." Lyra's heart raced as she processed his words. Was this really possible? Could it be that the kindness John offered wasn't some trap or manipulation? Could it be that he genuinely cared? And if he did, then what did that mean for her? She had been taught to survive by any means necessary, to stay strong in the face of cruelty. But now, standing before John, she felt something shift inside her. Could she allow herself to believe in this kindness? "You've shown me more kindness than I've ever known," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But how can I trust it? How can I trust you?" John reached out slowly, as if afraid that his touch might scare her away. But Lyra didn't pull back. She didn't move. She simply watched him, waiting. "I can't promise you that everything will be easy," he said, his voice low and filled with sincerity. "But I can promise you this. I will never make you do anything you don't want to do. I will never hurt you. You're not a slave here, Lyra. You're a person. And as long as I'm here, I'll protect you." Lyra felt a wave of emotion wash over her. She had been a slave for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to be seen as more than just a thing. But John was showing her a world she hadn't dared to dream of, one where she wasn't bound by chains, one where she could be free. Days turned into weeks, and Lyra's life began to change in ways she couldn't have imagined. The once stark walls of the small building she had been confined to now felt like a home. It wasn't much, but it was hers, and more importantly, it was safe. Safe in a way she had never known. John had kept his word. He treated her with respect, with kindness, and with patience. His actions, his words, they spoke of something real, something deeper than anything Lyra had been taught to expect from humans. Yet, despite all of this, a storm raged within her. The ghosts of her past, of the life she had been forced to live, refused to leave her. Every time Lyra looked at John, she found herself questioning whether this was just another trap. Could she truly trust him? Could she trust anyone? She had spent her life under the control of others, always afraid, always running from one moment of torment to the next. And now, here she was, being offered something she had long forgotten, a chance at freedom. But with that freedom came a choice. And that choice terrified her. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, Lyra sat by the window, watching the world outside. The winds had picked up, carrying the scent of the desert into the room. John was working in the corner, cleaning some tools. The silence between them was comfortable, but there was a tension that neither of them could deny. Lyra had been thinking about the future. She had been thinking about what would happen when the invaders returned. Would John still protect her? Would he still offer her the kindness he had shown her these past few weeks? Or would everything come crashing down? Would she once again become a slave, trapped in a life she couldn't escape? Her heart pounded as she turned to John. "What happens when they come for me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. John paused, his hands frozen mid-motion. He turned to face her, and for the first time, Lyra saw the true weight of the question in his eyes. It wasn't just a question of survival anymore. It was A question of loyalty, of sacrifice, and of what it meant to truly care for someone else. "They'll come," he said quietly, walking over to her. "I don't know when, but I know they will. The question is, what will we do when they do?" Lyra felt her breath catch in her throat. She had been preparing for this moment, but now that it was here, it felt impossible to face. She was no longer the same person she had been when she first arrived on Earth. She had changed. She had learned to trust, to feel something other than fear and pain. But now, standing before John, she had to decide. Would she fight for her freedom, for her new life? Or would she return to the chains of her past? "I can't go back," she whispered, almost to herself. "I can't go back to being a slave." John's face softened, and he reached out, his hand gently touching hers. "You don't have to," he said. "Not if you don't want to. You have a choice, Lyra. You can choose your future, and I will help you." But the reality of that choice hit Lyra like a wave. Freedom wasn't just a gift, it was a responsibility. It meant standing up to the invaders, to the life that had always controlled her. It meant leaving behind everything she had known and stepping into the unknown. But it also meant living, truly living, for the first time in her life. Tears welled in her eyes as she looked up at John. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I don't know if I can do it. I don't know if I'm strong enough." John smiled softly, his eyes filled with understanding. "You don't have to be strong alone. I'll be here, I'll help you. Together, we can face whatever comes next." Lyra closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. The fear was still there, but something else had taken root inside her, a feeling of hope, something she had thought was impossible to hold on to. For the first time in her life, she wasn't alone. She wasn't just surviving, she was living. And in that moment, she realized something that would change everything. The choice was hers. She didn't have to be a slave. She didn't have to be controlled. It was time to take control of her own future. The decision had been made. It wasn't easy, but it was clear. Lyra could no longer live in the shadow of her past. She had to face the truth that had been buried deep within her for so long. She was more than a slave. She was more than the circumstances of her birth. She was a person, with the right to choose her destiny. But with that choice came the harsh reality of what it meant to fight for her freedom. The invaders, the Ashara, would not simply let her go. They had claimed her as their own, and in their eyes, she was nothing more than property. It was a battle she had been avoiding for weeks, but now it was unavoidable. The question wasn't whether she would fight, it was how. Lyra had never known true combat, never known what it meant to stand against the forces that had enslaved her. But now, she was ready. She had John by her side, and together, they would fight back. She had come to understand something about him that she hadn't before. He wasn't just protecting her out of pity. He was protecting her because he believed in something greater than the world they had found themselves in. He believed in freedom, in justice, and in the right to live without fear. The days leading up to their confrontation with the Ashara were tense. Lyra trained in secret, learning everything she could from John. He taught her how to move, how to stay hidden, and how to use the tools she had at her disposal. But more than that, he taught her how to trust herself, how to believe that she was capable of fighting for her own life. The fear that had once consumed her was still there, but now, it was tempered by something stronger, determination. One night, as the full moon hung high in the sky, Lyra stood in front of John, ready. She was no longer the scared, confused girl who had arrived on Earth. She was someone different, someone with purpose. "I'm ready," she said, her voice firm. John nodded, his face filled with pride. "I knew you would be. You've come a long way, Lyra. This is your fight now, and I'll be with you every step of the way." Together, they left the safety of their hideout and made their way toward the heart of the Ashara's stronghold. The air was thick with tension as they approached the towering structure, a symbol of the invaders' power. The closer they got, the more Lyra's heart raced, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. Not now. As they reached the perimeter, they saw the Ashara soldiers patrolling, their movements robotic, efficient. Lyra and John stayed in the shadows, moving silently, waiting for the right moment. They had a plan, a small window of opportunity. The Ashara weren't invincible, and John knew this. Their technology was advanced, but it wasn't infallible. They had weaknesses. And tonight, those weaknesses would be their downfall. They made their way to the central control room, the heart of the Ashara's operations. Lyra could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. This was it, the final stand. But as they moved closer to their goal, a voice echoed in the distance. "You won't get far." Lyra froze, her heart leaping into her throat. The voice was familiar, cold, and commanding. It was the leader of the Ashara, the one who had brought her to Earth in the first place. His presence was unmistakable. And now he was standing in front of them, blocking their way. Lyra's breath caught in her chest, but she stood tall, refusing to show fear. She had come too far to back down now. She was no longer a slave. "I'm not afraid of you," she said, her voice steady. Even though her heart pounded in her ears, the leader of the Ashara looked at her, his expression unreadable behind the mask that covered his face. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then slowly he spoke. "You should be." The leader of the Ashara stood in front of them, his presence overwhelming, his cold eyes fixed on Lyra. The battle was no longer about survival. It was about freedom. It was about proving that she was more than just a slave, more than just the scars of her past. It was about choosing who she wanted to be in this new world, and nothing, not even the fear that still lingered in her heart, could stop her now. John moved closer to Lyra, standing beside her as they faced the leader. The silence stretched between them like a taut rope, ready to snap at any moment. "You've come to take me back," Lyra said, her voice clear and strong, though her heart pounded in her chest. "But I won't go." The Ashara leader's lips curled slightly, a cruel smile hidden beneath his mask. "You don't have a choice. You are nothing more than a tool, a weapon for my people. Your fate was sealed the moment you were brought here." But Lyra stood her ground. She wasn't the same girl who had arrived on Earth, frightened and confused. She had learned to fight, not just for survival, but for her dignity. And she wouldn't let him take that away from her. "We all have a choice," she said, her words firm and unwavering, "and this is mine." John moved to the side, positioning himself between Lyra and the leader. He had prepared for this moment, and now as he looked at Lyra, he saw the strength that had grown in her over the weeks. She wasn't just his responsibility anymore. She was a warrior in her own right. And he would protect her with everything he had. "You may have the power to control us," John said, his voice low but full of resolve. "But you don't have the power to break our will." The leader of the Ashara stepped forward, raising his hand as though to strike. But before he could move, Lyra acted. Her training had taught her to be swift, to be unpredictable. She grabbed a weapon she had hidden in her cloak, a small, sharp blade, and aimed it directly at the leader. For a moment, he hesitated, his cold gaze flickering with something akin to recognition. Perhaps he realized that this was no longer the frightened slave he had once captured. This was someone who had taken back her life, someone who would fight to the end. But then, just as the leader raised his own weapon, a loud noise rang through the air. The walls of the control room shook and the lights flickered. A burst of energy pulsed through the room, sending the Ashara leader stumbling backward. It wasn't just Lyra and John who had been preparing for this moment. The villagers, those who had been oppressed by the Ashara, had been working in secret. They had gathered their strength, their courage, and now they were making their move. They had been waiting for the right time, and this was it. Lyra turned to John, her eyes wide with surprise, but he only smiled. "We're not alone," he said. Together the humans and Lyra fought back with everything they had. The Ashara were powerful, but they were not invincible. The tide of battle shifted as the resistance moved in, overwhelming the invaders with their determination and unity. The leader of the Ashara, realizing he had underestimated the strength of the humans and Lyra, made one final desperate attempt to flee. But Lyra wasn't going to let him escape, not after everything he had done. With a swift motion, she closed the distance between them and disarmed him. She stood over him, her breathing heavy, but her heart was at peace. "You'll never control me again," she said, her voice steady, her eyes burning with defiance. The leader, defeated and broken, could do nothing but watch as the people he had enslaved took back what was rightfully theirs. As the dust settled, and the last of the invaders were driven out, Lyra stood with John, the weight of the moment sinking in. The battle had been won, but it was more than just a physical victory. It was a triumph of will, of freedom, and of hope. Lyra turned to John, her heart filled with gratitude and something deeper. "I never thought this day would come," she said quietly. John smiled, his eyes soft with pride. "Neither did I. But sometimes, the impossible becomes possible, one choice at a time." And so, in the aftermath of the battle, Lyra's journey truly began. She was no longer a slave, no longer a victim of circumstance. She was free. And with John by her side, she knew she could face whatever came next.